Friday's meeting between President Zelenskyy and the Trump administration in the White House has left both Americans and Europeans disgusted, albeit for different reasons. No matter how you see it, we can already see the very real-life consequences for a country struggling for its very existence. The State Department has already cut off aid for restoring Ukraine's energy grid. Weapons transfers are under consideration, and Republican voices are crying for Zelenskyy's resignation. So what is Europe going to do? That's what we're about to discuss with my guest, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, Elisabeth Braw. Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us on World News Tonight.
Good evening.
Now, people are split. Some say Zelenskyy overplayed his hand and didn't express gratitude. Others say that this was a hit job and setup of the Ukrainian president at the White House. In your opinion, who is to blame for Friday's train wreck there in the Oval Office?
What seemed obvious was that both President Trump and Vice President Vance were keen to make some sort of points against President Zelenskyy, and they were waiting for an opportunity to criticize him, and that's what they did, and he tried to defend himself. And frankly, to those who say, well, President Zelenskyy should have been more deferential, he should have been more complimentary of President Trump and the United States. Well, this man is leading a nation that is under invasion. He has other things to think about than the most, perhaps the best kind of protocol in an event, at an event like this. He is defending his country against an invasion, and so we should cut him some slack if he's not the most diplomatic guest the White House has ever seen. And frankly, those of us who have the incredible fortune of living in countries that are not invaded by a neighbor or anybody else, we should show some generosity in spirit and indeed in finances and weapons to those countries that unfortunately have the misfortune of having been invaded. So the bottom line is, sure, Zelenskyy could have been more complimentary like President Macron was, like Prime Minister Starmer was, but he faced sudden verbal assault, and he did what I think any country's leader would have done under those circumstances, which is defend his country, because that country faces an existential threat.
Now, there are calls for Zelenskyy to resign or change his approach to the peace talks that the U.S. administration is trying to push for. Should Kyiv mend its ties with the United States? And if so, how exactly should it go about doing that?
Well, the problem with such calls is that, sure, Zelenskyy could resign tomorrow, but that doesn't guarantee full-fledged American support for Ukraine. President Trump may come, indeed, is likely to present various further demands further down the line that then whoever is leading Ukraine at that point, if President Zelenskyy were to resign, would then have to comply with or face similar threats of withdrawal of American support. So if your starting point is that your country, the other country, has to fully comply with my demands, or your leader has to resign, then the country facing such calls will never have any security, because your ostensible friend, the United States, may impose more conditions on you, and if you don't meet them, you will then be in further trouble. And I think the bottom line or the basis of intergovernmental relations is that each country, at least each democratic country, respects the other country's leadership.
Right, and with these calls for diplomacy, it seems like that was quite elusive yesterday, well, at least in my opinion. After being asked to leave the White House after this fiasco that we saw yesterday, Zelenskyy flew to London to attend the emergency summit hosted by Prime Minister Starmer on Sunday. That's still ahead of us, but he met with Starmer today. What is Prime Minister Starmer likely to advise Zelenskyy at this point, and what do you think is going to come out of this summit? Is the burden of Ukraine squarely now on European shoulders? Excuse me.
Well, it's certainly much more on European shoulders than it was 24 hours ago. But it was heartwarming, I think, for all of us watching the proceedings yesterday and again today, to see the enormous outpouring of support for Ukraine, for Zelenskyy, that came from European leaders the moment Zelenskyy had been de facto expelled from the White House, asked to leave the White House. European leaders virtually unanimously tweeted and otherwise communicated their support of Zelenskyy. And that is the right approach. You defend, I think a human instinct is to defend anybody who is being attacked. And Ukraine has been attacked by Russia. You don't beat up on the victim. And that is a human instinct, and it is also the instinct of democratic countries, has been the practice of democratic countries for a very long time, to defend countries that have been attacked by another country. And they did it once again yesterday and today, European leaders. And so when it comes to the summit in London, European leaders are likely to affirm that support. Now, of course, they have to come up with very practical measures to increase practical support of Ukraine, both financial and military, and that will be, as we all know, a very difficult challenge. But we should also remember that American support in military terms under President Trump hasn't been as strong as it was under Biden, and indeed in Biden's final months in office, the Republican-led Congress put constraints on U.S. support for Ukraine. So it hasn't been as extensive. The U.S. military support hasn't been as extensive as it was during the first year of the invasion. And the other thing to remember is that what we have seen from Europe is unusually strong, unanimous, indeed almost unanimous support of Ukraine. Europe is not folding. Europe is not dividing. Only a couple of leaders have strayed from that viewpoint that Ukraine needs to be defended. So that's a good starting point for the negotiations tomorrow.
This meeting, if we look at it as about a 45-minute press conference, it seemed to be going along very well, at least for a while, at least until President Zelenskyy asked J.D. Vance that question. Then things kind of went off the rails. So how difficult is it going to be now to correct the path? Because none of us expected it. It looked like it was going fine, and then obviously this completely went off track. So how difficult is it going to be for Ukraine to correct course at this time?
I think what we have seen in the almost 24 hours since this happened is that President Zelenskyy has tried to communicate with the American public. He went on Fox News only a couple of hours after that incident, and he was remarkably calm and tried to make his case to the American public. And it was remarkable, actually, to see that interview on Fox News. Fox, as we know, is generally an ardent defender and supporter of President Trump, but it was a very civilized interview. And the interviewer let President Zelenskyy finish his sentences and clearly express his thoughts. And I think Zelenskyy was successful in trying to communicate to the American public that Ukraine is fighting for its survival, and it's not just the moral and a moral imperative for America to support Ukraine, but also it is in America's interest to do so. And so that's, I think, a good starting point for what will be a long process of mending ties. Now, we should remember that the relations between Trump and Zelenskyy were not particularly good to begin with. Trump has long resented Zelenskyy for refusing to comply with Trump's wishes to, in effect, implicate Hunter Biden. There was a very complicated case, but Trump has resented Zelenskyy ever since. So Zelenskyy was in an unenviable position. But the point is, I think he made his views clear to the American public and made a successful appeal to the American public for support.
Well, let's hope that this course can be corrected, and of course that we can get closer to peace talks. Elisabeth Braw, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And that concludes this edition of World News Tonight. Thank you all for watching. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next time. Good night.